There we are. We're live.
Okay, and welcome back to Roeh, Israel. We are ending our Sabbath day with Havdalah, and then we're going to go right into Yom HaBikkurim, which is going to be then Saturday evening and Sunday. But we begin with the Havdalah. As you see, the candle's already lit, the wine is poured, we have the spices here. Havdalah means separation. It separates the holy from the ordinary. In some scriptures, it says holy from profane. Profane means ordinary, means that which is not holy. So we're going to have a little bit of an abbreviated Havdalah service. If you have the little handout, that's great. If you don't, it's sitting over there, and you can join us. are going to. Do you have the blessing for the counting of the Omer?
It came back.
Go. To them. And what we will do is every day we're going to transfer one of this base over to this when they are all from here to here 50. What a concept. I don't know. Did Bay start this? Somebody started this and I loved it so much I said we're going to do that. So do you have the blessing for the counting of the Omer up?
I've got it up.
I think it's your turn.
Okay. Okay, the blessing for counting the Omer is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kisham b'mitzvah v'tzivanu el safarat ha-omer. Blessed are you, Adonai, our sovereign of the universe, who has sanctified us with your commandments and commanded us to count the Omer. Hayom Yom Echad LaOmer. Today is the first day of the Omer.
We have now transferred one. All righty. So right now,
Okay.
the master of the clicker shall take, and it's right there off your right there.
Okay.
And he is going to lead us.
I'm going to have to read some of it because when I put it on slide, let me kick my phone off. It's going through my hearing aids, and I'm hearing myself talk after I'm talking. Yes, it was. Okay. I was with the wheat kernel drop. It showed them dropping down, but it won't. The offering of the barley first fruits.
It's the same color.
Yeah.
I have a question. Well, I just push the because it's got to remove here.
Yeah. There you go.
Okay.
I got rid of it for you.
Okay.
Right.
But
All you got to do is just push the button.
next slide. Okay.
So Yom Kippur is day of the first fruits, or first fruit, is day of the. I Yom Kippur because there's several days of first fruits, as you'll see. For the year, for the biblical year, it's the beginning of the harvest at the time. This 2017 to 19, 3 times in a year, all thy males shall appear before the Lord. Thou shalt not offer the blood of my sacrifice with leavened bread, neither shall the fat of my sacrifice remain until the morning. The first thy land thou shalt bring to the house of the Lord thy God, and then thou shalt not boil a kid in its mother's milk. Not sure why they added that at the end of that, but
that was an oh by the way.
Yeah, oh by the way, yes. And this is from the Koran edition of the scriptures. It's put out society. So we see that every time for a festival, offerings and first fruits, tithes with them.
Because you shall not appear
be handed. And the Lord spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you are come to the land which you harvest, you shall bring harvest to the priest, shall wait before the Lord to be accepted for you. Appreciate it, and you shall offer that day when you wave the omer a he lamb without blemish of the first year for a burnt offering to the Lord. And the meal offering thereof shall be 2/10 measures of fine flour, mingled with oil, an offering made by fire to the Lord for a sweet savor. And its drink offering shall be of wine, the 4th part of a hin. And you shall eat neither bread, nor parched corn, nor green ears, until that very day, until you have brought it, or brought an offering to your God. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations, in all your dwellings, and you shall count for your tomorrow after the Sabbath 50 days. From the day that you brought the omer of the wave offering, 7 complete Sabbaths or weeks shall be there. And to the morrow after the 7th Sabbath shall you number 50 days, and you shall offer a new meal offering to the Lord. So,
and maybe be seen more straight on.
okay.
And you won't block it.
And I won't block. Okay. Yeah.
It's smaller.
Leviticus 2:11-16. No meal offering which you bring to the Lord shall be made with leaven. You shall burn in the oven, nor any honey made savor. And the meal shalt thou season with salt, nor shalt thou set salt to be lacking my meal offering with all thy offerings. Thou shalt offer salt. And if thou offer a meal offering of thy first fruits to the Lord, thou shalt offer the meal offering of thy first of grain, I should say, not corn. They didn't have corn back in Israel until they came to the New World. Dried by fire, grain beaten out of fresh ears, and you shall put oil upon it and lay on frankincense. It is a meal offering, and the priest shall burn the memorial part of it, of its beaten grain, and of its oil with all its frankincense. It is an offering made by fire to the Lord. And we already heard last week what that sweet savor is. So, and you know, you weren't here last week. So we Dreama shared, a friend of mine sent a comment on Facebook and said that it was a rabbi talking about that sweet smell that came from the offerings, and he compared it to baking chocolate chip cookies. He said when you bake the cookies, you smell that smell and you're anticipating something good is about to happen. So he equated that with when they offered up the sacrifices, the father would smell that and realize, oh, one of my children is coming back. One of my children wants to be spending time with me. And I thought that was so poignant.
That is, I've never heard that, but that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Very beautiful. And you'll notice the salt thing here.
Yes, always salt.
A lot of salt. And that's why some people, when you're doing challah for Shabbos, they put a little salt on it.
Uh-huh.
It's not a requirement, but
Yeah.
it's just one of the things that some people do. And
Yeah.
so when that happens, now you'll see where it came from.
I thought it was interesting that no honey, because honey was listed as, we'll see later, as 7, but they changed it from honey to dates because the word for honey is dabash, which means sticky syrup, and they make a syrup out of the dates. So therefore, they would avoid putting honey on the altar.
And the land flowing with halav and devash.
Yes. Numbers 18, 12, and 13 says, all the best of the oil and all the best of the wine and of the wheat, the first of them which they shall offer to the Lord, them have I given thee. The first ripe fruit of all that is in the land, which they shall bring to the Lord, shall be thine. Every one that is clean in thy house shall eat of it. And here he's talking to the priesthood. These first fruits were for them. Here's where it gets small. Again. Deuteronomy 26, 1 through 11. And it shall be when thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God gives thee for an inheritance, and dost possess it, and dost dwell therein, that thou shalt take of the first of all the fruit of the earth, which thou shalt bring of thy land, that the Lord thy God gives thee, and shalt put it in a basket, and shalt go to the place which the Lord thy God hath chose to place his name there. And thou shalt go to the priest that shall be in those days, and say to him, I profess this day to the Lord thy God, that I am come to the country which the Lord swore to our fathers to give us. And the priest shall take the basket out of thy hand, and set it down before the altar of the Lord thy God. And thou shalt speak and say before the Lord thy God, an Aramean nomad was my father, and he went down to Mitzrayim, and sojourned there with a few, and became there a nation great, mighty, and populous. And the Mitzrayim dealt ill with us, and afflicted us, and laid upon us hard bondage. And when we cried to the Lord God of our fathers, the Lord heard our voice, and looked on our affliction, and our labor, and our oppression. And the Lord brought us out of Mitzrayim with a mighty hand, and with an outstretched arm, and with great terribleness, and with signs, and with wonders. And he brought us to this place, and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And now, behold, I have brought the first fruits of the land, which thou, O Lord, hast given me. And thou shalt set it before the Lord thy God, and worship before the Lord thy God. And thou shalt rejoice in every good thing which the Lord God has given thee, and thy house, thou and the Levite, and the stranger that is among you. So it wasn't just for your enjoyment, it was for the priest and the stranger that lived among you.
And this is the celebration
Mm-hmm.
ceremony of I'm finally home.
Yes, exactly. That's the message that he was telling them to give when they offered.
Finally, and I recognize it, and I'm bringing an offering. Now come at you.
Mm-hmm.
Real. Several million baskets coming to the temple.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah,
this is a pilgrimage. And
exactly.
So here we are.
You know, and they did it 3 times a year, so it really drove it home all year long. Everything we got come from him. Right. In John 20, verses 14 through 18, we have Miriam coming to the tomb and finding it empty. It says, when she had said this, speaking to the angels that were there, she turned around and saw Yeshua standing there, and yet she did not know that it was Yeshua. She didn't recognize him. And Yeshua said to her, woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking? Thinking that he was the gardener, she said to him, sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you put him, and I will take him away. Yeshua said to her, Mary. She turned and said to him in Hebrew, Rabboni, which means my teacher. Yeshua said to her, stop clinging to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father, but go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, and my God and your God. Mary Magdalene came and announced to the disciples, I have seen the Lord, and that he has said these things to her. So she tells his disciples.
That's some seriously good news.
Yeah, that was some good news. I can just imagine her hearing Mary, recognizing the voice.
And saying it in the way he always.
Yes, yes,
And he called her by name.
yes, exactly. Then in 1 Corinthians 15, 20 and 20 through 24, but the fact is, Messiah has been raised from the dead. Paul has been discussing, well, what happens if Messiah hadn't raised from the dead? We're the most miserable people in the world for believing false lies. Well, all lies are false, aren't they? False things. There's a double negative there. Does that negate it? Yeah, I was wondering if a false lie would be truth. Hey, I is what I is. But the fact is, Messiah has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who are asleep. For since by man death came, by a man also came the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, so also in Messiah all will be made alive.
Amen.
But each in his own order, Messiah the first fruits, after that those who are Messiahs at his coming. Then comes the end, when he hands over the kingdom to our God and Father, when he has abolished all rule and all authority and power. He is our guarantee that we have, his resurrection is a guarantee that we have eternal life.
Amen. Amen.
Yes.
And,
It's
and
proof.
we've been clamoring for a change of government. He's going to bring in the everlasting government.
Yeah,
Amen.
And of his government and of his peace,
there'll be no end.
Amen.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Now, I wanted to read some from the Mishnah, which is part of the Talmud, in the section HaBikkurim, chapter 3. And the numbers on the side are just the paragraph numbers that they gave. And this is their understanding during the temple time and shortly after how the Bikkurim was brought and how do we handle this and everything. One set aside Bikkurim. A man goes down into his field, he sees a fig or whatever that ripened, or a cluster of grapes that ripened, or a pomegranate that ripened, or a piece of wheat or barley at this time of year, and he ties a reed rope around it and says, let these be Bikkurim. So he goes out and chooses the best of his crop. Rabbi Shimon says, even so, he must again designate them as Bikkurim after they have been plucked from the soil. So they set them aside for this purpose. And I was reading with some friends all about this, and they went into great detail of, you can't use this for this, this, and this, and if you use it for this, you got to pay 20%, and they they really got into the details. How about the Bikkurim taken up to Jerusalem? All the inhabitants of the cities of the Mamad, and in the Talmud that refers to the members of the priestly watch. So all the inhabitants of cities of the priestly watch would assemble in the city of the priestly watch, and they would spend the night in the open street, and they would not enter any of the houses. Early in the morning, the officers would say, let us arise and go up to Zion, unto the house of the Lord our God. Yes. Yes. And I'm sure they were singing the whole time because this was very festive. Those who lived near Jerusalem would bring fresh figs and grapes and grains, while those who lived far away would bring dried figs and raisins. An ox would go in front of them, his horns bedecked with gold and with an olive crown on his head. The flute would play before them until they would draw close to Jerusalem. When they drew close to Jerusalem, they would send messengers in advance, and they would adorn their Bikkurim. The governors, chiefs, and treasurers of the temple would go out to greet them, and according to the rank of the entrance, they would go forth. All the skilled artisans of Jerusalem would stand up before them and greet them, saying, our brothers, men of such and such a place, we welcome you in peace. The flute would play before them until they reached the Temple Mount. When they reached the Temple Mount, even King Agrippa would take a basket and place it on his shoulder and walk as far as the temple court, because that's the only. Yeah, he didn't get to take it very far. When he got to the temple court, the Levites would sing the song from Psalm 30 and verse 2 that we sang this morning. I will extol you, O Lord, for you have raised me up, and you have not let my enemies rejoice over me. The birds tied to the basket were offered as whole burnt offerings. So they tied birds. I'm sure they tied their legs to the basket rims. And they were offered as whole burnt offerings, and those which they held in their hands, they gave to the priest. While the basket was still on his shoulder, he recites from, I acknowledge this day before the Lord your God that I have entered the land that the Lord swore to our fathers to assign us, from Deuteronomy 26:3, until he comes to the passage, Rabbi Judah said, until he reaches, my father was a fugitive Aramean. When he reaches, my father was a fugitive Aramean, he takes the basket off his shoulder, holds it by the edges, and the priest places his hand beneath it and waves it. And the priest, he then recites, the person that brought it, my father was a fugitive Aramean, until he completes the entire passage. He then deposits the basket by the side of the altar and bows and departs. I would say that was the only time that they got to go in that close, when they offered the first fruits. Because at least in the tabernacle, the doorway of the outer court was as far as they could go when they sacrificed animals there. Originally, all who knew how to recite would recite, while those who did not know how to recite, others would read it for them, and they would repeat the words. But when they refrained from bringing, they decreed that they should read the words to both those who could and those who could not recite, so that they could repeat after them. So here shows the kindness that they had. You had these people that weren't able to read, and they'd go in and,
or maybe new people that didn't know Hebrew,
or new people that, yeah, they weren't familiar with it. Young
They
people,
love God.
yeah. And so the priest got to noticing, some of these people aren't coming anymore. I think we've embarrassed them by them, and then these other guys are reading so fluently. So we'll just read for everybody. That way they won't be embarrassed. Good way to handle that. The rich would bring their bikkurim in baskets overlaid with silver or gold, while the poor used wicker baskets of peeled willow branches, and the baskets and the bikkurim were given to the priest. The metal ones were given back to the owner after they put it in another container, but the wicker baskets went back to the owners that brought it. Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas said they would decorate the bikkurim with produce other than the 7 species, but Rabbi Akiva says they may decorate only with the produce of the 7 kinds.
You mean we disagreed with
We disagreed with one another. Rabbi Shimon says there are 3 elements in bikkurim: the bikkurim itself, the additions to the bikkurim, and the ornamentations of the bikkurim. The additions to the bikkurim must be of a like kind, but the ornaments can be of a different kind. The additions to the bikkurim can only be eaten in purity and are exempt from demai, or a status of being doubtful.
All right, I'm getting lost.
But the ornamentations of the bikkurim were subject to demai.
The bikkurim
Is the offering of the grain.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. When did they say that the additions to the bikkurim are like bikkurim themselves? When they come from the land of Israel. But if they do not come from the land, they will not be regarded as bikkurim themselves.
In other words,
If you
can't bring imported grain to the
right, don't bring grain from Syria, Texas. Yeah.
Right?
And then, in what respect did they say that bikkurim are the property of the priest? In that he can purchase with bikkurim slaves and land and unclean beasts, and a creditor of his may take them for his debt and his wife for her ketubah, as may be done with the Torah scroll. So what they're saying there is, once you gave it to the priest, it was theirs to do what
Whatever
they
they
wanted to.
wanted.
They could barter with it for different things, or they could make their own bread, make their bread out of it, or have a nice juicy fig, or whatever to eat. Yeah, that would be. And you get tens and twenties of thousands of people bringing all this. They're not going to be able to eat it all, so they would use it for currency, basically. Rabbi Judah says Bikurim may be given only to a priest that is a chaver, or a friend or associate, and as a favor. So if you didn't bring it, what they're saying there is, if you didn't bring it to the temple, you could give it to a priest in the cities that they lived in. But the sages say they are given to the men of the Mishmar, which are the watching people. Later, this term was used to define those who would stay up all night reading the Torah in the shuls. They were called Mishmarim. And they divide among themselves, as they do with all other consecrated objects. So where does the word Bikurim come from? It's the Hebrew word 1061, according to Strong's numbering system, and it means bikur. It's the first of grain and fruit that ripened and was gathered and offered to God according to Torah instructions. And it comes from H1069, Bakar. That's one of those commentatus for people that learn Hebrew. To bear early, new fruit, and also the firstborn. So they brought Bikurim of the flocks, the firstborn.
And it's the same root as boker, which is like morning.
Yes.
When you say boker tov, you're saying
Yes.
morning.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. The Bikurim were offered from the 7 species special to the land of Israel: wheat, barley, grapes, figs, olives, pomegranates, and dates. In the King James Version, in Deuteronomy 8:8, the word dates is written as honey because it's a sweet substance. Since he said not to bring any honey and offer it on the altar, they changed it to dates.
Who changed it?
I
people
guess
who
the
knew
rabbi.
better.
I guess the people that knew better. Yeah.
Only 1611 years later.
Now, in our 2 passages from the New Testament, the writings of the Nazarenes, or the renewed covenant, number G 536 which is a pay. And it's to offer firstlings or first fruits, to take away the first fruits of the productions of the earth, which the first portion of dough, we know as the challah, from which sacred loaves were to be prepared. Hence, the term is used persons consecrated to God for all time. And I think that's probably the way that it uses it of Yeshua.
Well, it's interesting. We have some acquaintances who are named Apache.
Apache.
No,
Oh.
Apache.
Apache, yes.
Yes. You know who I'm talking
Yes,
about.
yeah. J and
D&J.
D, or D and J, or
D&J.
D and J.
AKA Larissa.
Yeah. And persons superior in excellence to others of the same class. And again, we can see a picture of Yeshua there. First, he was the first resurrected and didn't see death again. It comes from the Greek I- and 7 and from
Two, maybe is
yes, yeah.
like a leading noun in Hebrew.
Mm-hmm. Like Yeshua, the Zadik of Zadiks. So what can we learn from this? Where it gets first fruit were brought not to the barley first fruit so much, kind of lost. It said they made a law after the temple was HaBikkurim can only be brought between Shavuot and Sukkot. Any other time, we don't accept it. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. The first fruits are not to be burnt on the altar. It says bitter grains, portion that is a handful, is burnt altar, a burnt offering, or the mizbeach. The fruit to be ground into flour. The calendar comes in. What is